Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Haiti Yanamine, and I'm with the Office of Public Participation. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for the State Water Board's Cost Assessment In-Depth Cost Methodology webinar, hosted by the Department of Drinking Water and moderated by the Office of Public Participation. This webinar is being held 100% virtually and is also being webcast publicly in English. We are also recording today's event and we'll make sure it is accessible for our attendees and anyone who may not have been able to join us today. On the current slide is the mission statement for the Water Board collectively. We achieve our mission through an array of programs established within our divisions and regions. As it's the Water Board's mission to preserve, enhance, and restore California's water resources for the benefits of present and future generations, we want to begin this webinar by acknowledging the groups who have and who continue to experience economic, environmental, and social disadvantages as a result of historical marginalization, and whose daily lives are impacted by racism and injustices. As a reminder, our work here today should strengthen the empowerment of Indigenous and community voices as we work together to provide clean, safe, and affordable water to all Californians. I want to take a moment to provide an overview of the Safer Drinking Water Program. SAFER stands for the Safe and Affordable Funding for Equity and Resilience. And the SAFER program's overarching goal is to provide safe and affordable drinking water in every California community for every Californian. The SAFER program, a term coined after the passing of Senate Bill 200 last year in July, formalizes work which the Water Board has already been doing for a long time. The creation of the new Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund with $130 million per year for 10 years towards drinking water projects, primarily in small disadvantaged communities, was intended to fill funding gaps in that pre-existing program. At the Water Board, the SAFER program is primarily implemented by the Division of Drinking Water, the Division of Financial Assistance, and the Office of Public Participation. Working with drinking water systems through the Division of Drinking Water, funding short and long-term solutions through the Division of Financial Assistance, and engaging with the communities served by those systems along the way through our Office of Public Participation. The SAFER Advisory Group, with 19 members representing various parts of the stakeholder community, was formed late last year to bring their local expertise to the table to advise on the program specifically for each annual fund expenditure plan. Next, let's review. We want to thank each of you for finding a way to join us virtually. We thank you for your patience and understanding as we moved to 100% virtual meeting space so that we can adapt to the current public health concerns. We are doing our best to make sure that everyone can participate in an effective way, and that is time, and that this time is valuable for you. We don't expect delays, but also for your patience. We ask for your patience in advance should any difficulties arise. During today's event, attendees will be able to submit questions through the Zoom's Q&A question and answer feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. You can input questions that you would like to answer, answered throughout the event. The host and panelists will be able to see the questions and be able to answer those as they relate to today's event. I do want to advise that this Q&A function does allow attendees to upvote questions. By upvoting, you simply click thumbs up on a question that you are also wondering about and would like answered. And this prioritizes the question and moves it based on the number of votes to the very top, which informs our staff today. That is an important question that you would like answered. So today, in addition to the Q&A feature, we will also have a period of open discussion, and attendees can submit questions via email to safer@waterboards.ca.gov. We do have staff reviewing those emails, and we'll try our best to ensure that all of your questions are answered or comments are heard. But we are also providing an opportunity for verbal comments or questions. So when the time comes, we will ask those that would like to speak to raise their virtual hand, and then we'll find you in the attendee list and ask you to unmute yourself. Attendees who are joining us by phone, you also have the opportunity to participate in those comments and discussions. So if you would like to raise your hand via phone, you would simply press *9. Then to unmute yourself, you would press *6. Lastly, this event is being webcast on the Cal EPA website. If you are watching this event through the webcast only, you would like to ask a question or share a comment, the best way to do this is to submit your question or comment via email to safer@waterboards.ca.gov. For technical assistance during this webinar, please email safer@waterboards.ca.gov. For today's event, we have many state water board staff assisting and supporting behind the scenes to ensure that everything runs smoothly and that we have a few participation bumps as possible. We want to take this time to acknowledge their work and dedication. Thank you for being here to support. All right, now I'd like to introduce Kristen, your host for this morning's webinar. Kristen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Haiti. And again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm so excited to dive into the details of our cost model. And we've got some fantastic speakers with us today who've been working very hard on developing this methodology. Before we dig in, I'm going to provide just a very high-level overview to set the stage of the presentation today and hopefully provide a little bit of context. So today we're going to be discussing the cost assessment, which is part of the Water Board's needs assessment, which I'll provide an overview of. We're going to then turn over to Sacramento State, which is going to talk about step 4 of our cost model, which is evaluating modeled solutions for sustainability and resiliency. And then we're going to move over to Corona Environmental, who will provide an overview of step 4B of the cost model, which is really going to be a deep dive into our cost estimates for possible modeled solutions. And then at the end, we're going to discuss next steps and timelines for the development of our cost model. But before we dive in, this is a webinar, which is part of a webinar series. And I wanted to just poll the audience and see how many of you were able to participate in our last webinar, which was focused on the cost model methodology, hosted on August 28th. The white paper and the recording of that webinar is available on the Safer State Water Board webpage. This gives us a little bit of an idea of who is maybe familiar with this, this model and folks who may be new to it, so we know how much background information we should be providing. Leave this open for just a few more seconds. And I'm ending the poll, sharing the results. It looks like the majority of you, 66%, were able to participate on our August 28th webinar, where we provided a high-level overview of our cost assessment methodology. So I'm so glad that you're able to join us again as we dig a little bit deeper. But we do have a number of new folks. 34% of those participating on the Zoom platform are new to this, and hopefully the overview that I'm going to provide will help set the stage for the presentations to come. But I do encourage you to look at our website and review the recording from the August 28th meeting if you're looking for a more high-level overview of the cost assessment methodology. Okay, I have one more poll question before we get in. We did recently release an updated version of our white paper on the cost methodology. And let me go to that poll question. We would like to know how many of you have had a chance to maybe read it or skim through it. It is a lengthy paper. If you have not read it yet or looked at it, that is totally fine. You don't need to have seen that paper to follow along with the presentations today. But if you are interested in learning more, I encourage you to take a look at that white paper. The hyperlink is here. It's on our SAFER webpage. And if you registered for our Zoom account, you should have received an email with a link to it. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Looks like a few of you have been able to read it or skim through it, but the majority of you have not, and they don't plan to, which is totally understandable. It does get into the weeds of our cost model methodology, but this helps us better understand whether or not our resources are being used or looked at. So thank you again for participating in our poll. Stop sharing. Okay, well, let's dig in. Like Katie said, the SAFER program really is born out of the human right to water, which was passed in 2012. Every human being has a right to safe, clean, affordable, and accessible water, adequate for human consumption, cooking, and sanitary purposes. And like Katie said, Senate Bill 200 did create the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, a new source of funding for drinking water systems in California, which provides up to $130 million per year through 2030. And the State Water Board uses that $130 million with all of the other funding sources we have at our disposal to help support the SAFER program. The fund expenditure plan, which helps determine prioritization of how those $130 million could be spent, is supposed to be based off of data analysis drawn from something called the needs assessment. And that's what we're talking about today. What is the needs assessment? The needs assessment has three core components to it. It has an affordability assessment, a risk assessment, and a cost estimate. The affordability assessment is looking at water rates and determining if there are communities, household systems where affordability is a challenge. The risk assessment methodology, which we are currently developing with UCLA and many other stakeholders and the public, thank you for those of you who've been participating on those webinars, is going to identify those water systems that are at risk of failing. So they're not failing yet, but they may in the future by looking at a number of different metrics or indicators. And then our cost estimate is looking at our at-risk systems and our systems that are currently failing and are on the human right to water list. And it's supposed to estimate how much would it cost for us to provide solutions for our at-risk and human right to water systems. What would that price tag be? And so we're digging into that today. We want to look at how much it would cost to fix these systems, and we're building a model to help us do that. We are also going to be doing a gap analysis, so we know how much funding we have available. This is going to be anticipating what the need is going to be, and what is that gap in between? How much are we perhaps not going to be able to provide? And so we are working with Corona and many others for developing this important model to help us make budgeting decisions. And I encourage you to, again, take a look at that white paper because it really goes into a lot of detail around what we're doing with this model. This is an infographic diagram that really provides a high-level overview of the steps that the model takes in order to estimate what the cost would be to provide solutions to our at-risk and failing systems. The first step is really identifying, well, who are our systems that are at risk and failing? Step two is figuring out, well, why are they at risk or why are they failing? What are the problems that need to be solved. Step 3 then matches those problems to possible modeled solutions for those communities and those systems. And we are looking at both of the problems, but we also are looking at additional community and water system information to help really identify what those possible modeled solutions might be. Step 4A and step 4B are starting to then look at those possible modeled solutions. Step 4A looks at the long-term sustainability and resiliency of those modeled solutions. And step 4B is looking at what the actual costs are for those modeled solutions. Because at the end of the day, we have to choose a modeled solution in order to generate that price tag, if you will, for those systems that we're analyzing. And you're going to hear us talk a little bit about the sustainability and resiliency piece of this today. That's really important for us because we don't want the model to be choosing the lowest cost solution for our systems. We recognize that the lowest cost may not always be the most resilient or sustainable solution for the community. So we want to be able to weigh cost and long-term resiliency within the model. So step 5, we select the best possible solution for the system. And again, I can't stress this enough. This is modeled solutions. In no way are the solutions that the model is choosing any way going to impact the solution that's on the ground for these communities. This is purely just for our budgeting purposes, identifying what we think the need might be for our funding programs. Step 5 aggregates all those costs across our system statewide, and we figure out, well, this is the demand, potential demand on our funding resources, and this is what the gap might be moving forward over the next 10 plus years. So that is a high-level overview of what our cost model will be doing. But today's webinar, we're really digging in deep into step 4A and 4B of our webinar. And I'm going to turn things over to the experts on this. Khalil with Sac State, take it away.
All right, thank you, Kristen. I'll be sharing my screen. Okay, can I confirm that you guys are seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. My name is Khalil Zaik, and I'm a research engineer with the team at the Office of Water Programs at Sacramento State. And we have been working on developing a sustainability and resiliency assessment as part of the cost assessment model process. My objective today is to present you with an overview of the sustainability and resiliency assessment methodology that we are currently developing, with a particular focus on the potential metrics that are being considered as indicators of the long-term efficiency, efficacy, and effectiveness of the potential modeled solutions. Another goal, of course, is to gather public feedback on the proposed list of metrics that could then be considered for refining the assessment further and for potentially incorporating additional metrics in the future. I would like to note that I'll be presenting a summary of the work that has been done so far, and I encourage anyone who's interested in more details to go ahead and refer to the companion white paper that has been drafted and that is hosted on the State Water Board website. First, let's establish some context and background for the sustainability and resiliency assessment. The assessment falls under the cost assessment component, which is dedicated to determining the costs of interim and long-term solutions for at-risk systems and systems that are in violation. I would like to emphasize that the sustainability and resiliency assessment is not intended for site-specific decisions on what potential model solutions will be implemented on the ground. Rather, the objective of this assessment is to offer a broad level evaluation of solution feasibility and efficiency in the long term. One aspect of this component is developing high-level cost estimates for modeled solutions, and that is work that is currently being done by our colleagues at Corona Environmental Consulting. While cost is a central and important consideration, sometimes the lowest cost model might not be the best long-term solution for a system. And there are other factors outside cost that can meaningfully evaluate what the best modeled solution could be. Therefore, it is important that the cost assessment model also incorporates an assessment of resiliency and sustainability that looks at these modeled solutions from a non-cost angle. And so based on this rationale, we are developing a framework to evaluate long-term sustainability and resiliency, which could then be used with Corona's solution cost estimates to evaluate what the best cost solutions for safe drinking water systems would be. So what is the sustainability and resiliency assessment looking at? Well, the assessment is designed to function as a multidisciplinary diagnostic tool aimed at evaluating the long-term efficiency and effectiveness of potential modeled solutions. The assessment performs this by using a multi-criteria decision model that individually evaluates sustainability and resiliency through multiple non-cost related perspectives or lenses, such as a solution's technical performance or environmental sustainability considerations. And then the model proceeds to aggregate the individual metric scores into one final score that allows us to compare the sustainability and resiliency between different modeled solutions in a drinking water system. So, developing a multi-criteria assessment involves a number of sequential steps. The primary steps are presented here in front of you, and they include, first, the selection of the metrics that are determined to be good indicators of long-term efficiency and effectiveness of potential modeled solutions. Second, the determination of risk thresholds, and that refers to the levels or values associated with the metrics and that evaluate whether whether a modeled solution is more or less sustainable or resilient. And finally, the last step is the determination of a scoring and aggregation scheme that enables us to merge these multiple metric evaluations into one value that reflects overall sustainability and resiliency. For today's presentation, however, my discussion will center on the metric development and selection process, and we will focus on the results of this process in the form of the sustainability and resiliency metrics that have been selected to evaluate potential model solutions. Additionally, I will briefly discuss the development of a sustainability and resiliency metric evaluation tool that will be used to determine which metrics will be included in the implementation phase of the assessment. Following that, my colleagues at Corona Environmental Consulting are going to take over and walk you through the details of the cost estimate model that they are developing. Okay, so before moving on to present the results of the metric selection, let's briefly examine how these metrics were developed. A literature review was conducted to identify available research that addresses comprehensive frameworks for small drinking water systems. A list of 58 unique metrics that are potentially applicable to tracking sustainability and resiliency were identified. And then these identified metrics were organized across 4 distinct categories, and they are listed right in front of you. They are economic viability, technical performance, environmental sustainability, and social acceptance. The table here lists the number of metrics under each category and provides definitions to each metric category. And that's an aspect, and we'll be addressing these details in the next several slides. After identifying the initial potential metrics, what came next was a process of selecting a short list of proposed sustainability and resilience metrics. The initial list of 58 metrics was shortlisted to 11 proposed metrics. And that selection of proposed metrics was primarily based on discussions in the project team meetings on the effective purpose, utility, and merit of each metric relative to assessing the sustainability and resiliency of the modeled solutions. The shortlisted metrics are listed in front of you, again, organized, categorized by the four categories that I just discussed. So now let's examine these shortlisted metrics in more detail. And we'll start with the first category, economic viability. The metrics under this category are indicators of the affordability of a solution for residents and the capacity of a system to manage and maintain its operations in the long term. These metrics include household income trends, number of service connections, the number of service connections over time, or the number of service connection trends, and finally, operation and maintenance cost per household. In addition to listing the metrics with their definitions, what this table is showing, and I'm referring specifically to the most right-hand column, is to the relationship between the metric score, the individual metric scores, and the overall sustainability and resiliency score. And this is intended to indicate whether the performance of a metric supports or detracts from the sustainability and resiliency of a designated modeled solution. So for example, the household income trends metric is directly proportional to the overall sustainability and resiliency score, since higher incomes contribute to the ability to afford a potential treatment solution over the long term. In more straightforward terms, if you have increasing household income trends, or for that matter, a higher number of service connections, then you're going to get a higher sustainability and resiliency score overall. Alternatively, operation and maintenance costs per households is inversely proportional to the overall sustainability and resiliency score, since higher operation and maintenance costs per household detract from the ability to afford a potential treatment solution. Again, in simpler terms, if you have higher operation and maintenance costs per household, then you are going to get a lower overall sustainability and resiliency score. For more details on how the metric relationships to the overall scores, to the overall sustainability and resiliency score were defined and reasoned, I encourage you all to refer to the companion white paper for this presentation. The second category is technical performance and includes shortlisted metrics that evaluate the capacity of a modeled solution to provide safe and affordable access to drinking water based on contaminants of concern for a community, and that can be sustained in the long term. These metrics include asset useful life, which refers to the period of time or amount of use that a solution will provide. The second metric is relative operational difficulty, which refers to an evaluation of which refers to the difficulty or complexity of treating water using a designated water treatment solution. And third is operator training requirement, which refers to the grade level certification that a person must hold to operate a system. In terms of the relationship of the metric evaluations to the overall sustainability and resiliency score, they are primarily defined by the impact that the complexity of a solution's technical requirements have on its sustainability and resiliency. That is why relative operational difficulty and operator training requirements are considered to be inversely proportional to sustainability and resiliency, since the thinking goes that more complicated treatment systems and the associated higher operator certification required increases the probability of system failure, which detracts from a system's long-term effectiveness. Again, this is a case where a higher score for relative operational difficulty and a higher score for operator training requirement correspond to an overall lower sustainability and resiliency score. The third category of metrics is environmental sustainability. It includes metrics that evaluate the environmental impacts and considerations for potential modeled solutions during its operation or during their operation, with their benefits being weighed against their negative impacts on the environment. The metrics in this category include regional water stress, which reflects the impact of a potential modeled solution on water stress in its area and the area's ability to meet human and ecological water demands. It also refers to greenhouse gas. The second metric is greenhouse gas emissions, which refers to the amount of emissions generated by a modeled solution in its lifetime. And the final metric is waste stream generation, which refers to the residuals that are generated from a treatment process. In terms of the inverse relationship between these individual environmental metrics and the overall sustainability and resiliency score, it is based on the thinking that the more the modeled solution contributes to increased water stress, higher greenhouse gas emissions, and higher waste stream generation, the more the solution detracts from its sustainability from an environmental perspective. Finally, the fourth and last category is that of social acceptance. This category refers to metrics that evaluate a community's willingness to adopt a solution based on its perceived effectiveness and benefits. Social acceptance metrics are difficult to gauge due to their subjectivity and highly local context. Within the literature, we managed to find numerous social acceptance metrics However, most were deemed as irrelevant, or as being addressed in other steps in the needs assessment. And so as a result, only one metric falls under this category, which is the jobs or opportunities for career development metric, with the assumption that the more job development is created by a potential model solution, the more willing is the community to adopt that solution in the long run. And so now that we've presented all of these shortlisted metrics in more detail, we have a third poll question for the audience. And that question is, do the proposed sustainability and resiliency metrics for modeled solutions seem appropriate for inclusion in the cost assessment? And we'll give you a minute to answer, provide your answers. Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, so the results are back. 42% of you say that yes, the metrics seem appropriate. 33% believe that the metrics need some adjustment. 0% of you do not think that these metrics are appropriate. And then 24% of you need more time to consider this question. And hopefully you can send your feedback to the saferatwaterboards.ca.gov email. Okay. Thank you, Kristen. So after a pool of proposed sustainability and resiliency metrics was identified from the literature review and was vetted using the expert judgment of the project team members, it was necessary to develop a systematic way to determine which of the proposed metrics would be selected for inclusion in the application phase of the assessment. That led to the development of the draft sustainability and resiliency metric evaluation tool, which would be used to evaluate metrics for inclusion into the assessment based on multiple criteria, such as a metric's applicability, its data availability, and the credibility of its data sources. If you're interested in the details of how this evaluation tool was developed and is implemented, I would recommend that you refer to the white paper where all of this is laid out in more detail. But for today, I'll very briefly mention that the tool evaluates each metric according to the criteria highlighted in steps 1 to steps 3. That would be the columns in front of you. And based on the evaluations in steps 1 to step 3, a decision is made on the inclusion of the metric into the assessment. And the different decision options are as follows. Please refer to the most right-hand column, which is step 4, which includes the decision regarding inclusion. And you're going to find 3 decision options. You have metrics that are denoted as yes, and those are metrics that will be included into the application phase of the assessment. Then you have metrics that are denoted as maybe, and those are metrics that might be included into the assessment pending further evaluation and investigation. And third, you have metrics that are denoted as future, and those are metrics that are recommended for potential consideration later outside the scope of the sustainability and resiliency assessment, but that retain some value for the SAFER program. Okay. And so before I proceed to my concluding slide, I will also mention the specific criteria that is needed to include the specific criteria needed for a metric to be included into the assessment. So again, those are the metrics that have the yes designation in the most right-hand column. So these criteria are as follows. The metric should not require site-specific data. If it does require site-specific data, this data should be available on a statewide level. Second, there should be expert agreement that the metrics inform the selection of a model solution in a meaningful way. Third, the metric data should be available from a reliable and credible source. And finally, fourth, the metric data should be updated regularly. So ideally, that would be annually. However, anywhere between 1 to 3 years would be accepted. For my concluding slide, I would like to present the next steps that we have planned to refine, improve, and implement the sustainability and resiliency assessment. First, public and advisory committee comments on the proposed list of sustainability and resiliency metrics will be gathered and considered for incorporation into the assessment. Second, a number of case studies will be conducted in small communities in California. The aim of the case studies will be to develop matrices that map the sustainability and resiliency metrics to combinations of potential treatment solutions. This process will be necessary to ensure that the sustainability and resiliency framework yields results that are not only comparable across different potential treatment model solutions, but that they are also reproducible along systems that are in violation and at-risk systems. Additionally, these case studies will help us to identify which thresholds and scoring criteria are most appropriate to capture sufficient details to differentiate between the sustainability and resiliency of the different model solutions. And with this, I've reached the end of my section of the presentation. I'd like to thank you all again for listening, and I'll be passing things over to Kristen.
Thanks, Khalil. And Tara, can you bring up your slides?
Yep, just give me 1 second.
Perfect. Again, thank you all for joining us today.
Can you see my screen yet, Kristen?
I can see your screen, but not in presentation mode yet.
Okay. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Great. I'm going to launch the poll. Okay, Tara, would you like to read the question?
Sure. When considering the challenges facing physical consolidation projects in general, which of the following do you view as the most difficult? And you can mark as many as are applicable. Physical consolidation is considered actually physically joining two water systems together by a water pipeline. So we would have a receiving system that's generally larger and a smaller joining system, and those can be human right to water systems or at-risk systems, and some of these may be regional type projects. So please feel free to mark these. All right, so the results are back, and it looks like about 67% of people felt that accessing funding is one of the biggest challenges. Potential change in rates was almost 50%, then potential change in rates for the other part of the system is about 40%, jurisdictional boundary changes is 33%, and adequacy of supply is about 27%. Negotiating agreements between the joining and receiving systems was the winner at 70%, which is definitely a challenge. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. I think I have the power. Okay, great. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here. So this is discussion topic number 1, and this is getting into solutions for at-risk systems. So for systems that are considered to be at risk due to affordability or technical, managerial, and financial capacity challenges, what solutions do you feel should be considered to address the issues? So to ask a question or share a comment from your Zoom screen, you can raise your hand. And if you're on the phone, please press *9.
And we have a question in from Horatio. Horatio, I'm going to allow you to talk. I think you can ask your question now.
Sorry, I didn't know I have my hand up.
No worries.
But yeah, just let me think about it, okay?
Yeah.
This is Haiti. We have a question in our chat box, in our Q&A box. Are you factoring in the massive loss of income that is affecting these cities, which are preventing them to go forward with needed improvements?
Thank you for the question. I'm sorry.
No, I think we're going to hold that one off until the end of the conversation today. Thanks. And it looks like we don't have anyone else with their hands up or questions or ideas for this. So if you have any thoughts, please feel free to email us at the safer@waterboards.ca.gov. Tara, would you like to continue?
Yes, so now you've seen this figure a few times, but what I want to draw your attention to is the part of the discussion we're going to be moving into now, which is step 4B. So as Kristen had mentioned towards the beginning of the presentation, if you'd rather, kind of in addition to this presentation, see the overview of all of these steps, I would definitely refer you to the August 28th presentation. This one's going deep into the weeds of technical details of cost development. So for all of you out there, fellow water nerds, this is your kind of presentation. For those of you that really like high-level overview, this may be a little more detailed than you would prefer. And I'll point out that in the slides that you received or that you can download, there are actually a bunch of slides we're not going to cover, but they're there for your reference. And it's actually very similar to the structure of the white paper, where we have kind of the high-level overview in the main part of the paper, and then the appendices get into very detailed information. So if you want the super detailed information, I would refer you to the end of this presentation or the white paper and the appendices if you really love the details. So we're going to go over step 4B right now, which is to develop the cost estimates for possible solutions. And just to emphasize one more time, these are just modeled solutions. It has no bearing on what a system really can choose in real life. It's just our best estimate of how we could budget the need. It doesn't determine anything about what the system's real choices are. Each system should definitely have its own individual evaluation and look at the pros and cons of each solution before picking a path to go down. Okay, so this be here, develop a cost estimate. So what we're going to cover in general is the kind of the high level cost estimates that are generated for the possible modeled solutions. And we're generating those modeled solutions, we're generating those costs for anything we see to be a feasible solution for that system. And then we'll narrow it down using Khalil's method to what we feel is more resilient or sustainable. And that's what's going to go into this budget. Again, each system really needs its own site-specific evaluation. So these are just planning level costs, and it's really important to us to consider the capital costs as well as the 20-year operation and maintenance costs. The 20-year operations maintenance costs are very important because that can really be a project killer for a lot of these small systems. It's very expensive in some cases for the ongoing operations and maintenance, so it's a huge part of decision making. So these are the topics we're going to cover: general cost information, physical consolidation, new well costs, treatment, point of use, point of entry, and other infrastructure needs. And you'll notice that I've grayed out some of these boxes so you can sort of see which one we're on, and this will kind of walk us through the order of the presentation. And when we get to this green box, treatment, I'm going to hand it over to Craig Gorman with Corona Environmental Consulting as well. And he's going to get deep into the treatment section. And again, that's most of the information that's kind of at the end of the presentation is the detailed treatment information in case you would like more detail on that. So first, we're going to talk about general cost information. And just so you're aware, we consider these very high-level cost estimates. So according to the AACE, which is the Association for Advancement of Cost Engineering, these are class 5 cost estimates, meaning not the most accurate yet, that you would get a lot more site-specific information to narrow down the actual cost. So the range is minus 50 to plus 100%. So that means if we say the cost is $100, then actually the range that we would consider that cost to be in would be 50 to 200. So, you know, when you see these costs, you should sort of be thinking about those error bars that are still on the costs at this point. You really have to gather a lot more site-specific information to get more accurate costing. So for the cost model considerations, this is just kind of a high-level graphic to show you for physical consolidation, which kinds of items we're considering: managerial consolidation, the blend, new wells, treatment, point of use, point of entry. And then we have this category we're calling additional costs, which is storage tanks, land acquisition, supply needs, electrical improvements, and SCADA systems. And we will be applying some assumptions, which I'll go over, to these additional costs, and they would be applied to any of these solutions, because the need isn't only to solve the water quality problem. In many cases, there are a lot of other needs in these systems, and we want to make sure that we're making an entirely functioning system and solving the problems that are not just, you know, causing them a violation today, but the ones that could come back and get us tomorrow. So one thing we felt was important, and I'd say this in the future could actually have a lot more refinement, is to do some sort of regional cost adjustment. So a lot of our costs really are Central Valley oriented. And that's because a lot of the human right to water systems that we've been looking at in more detail are in the Central Valley. So we thought that was the best place to start. So the costs we have are really more from the Valley. So that means that, you know, we need to do some sort of adjustment for the rest of the state where it's more expensive. So for right now, we're using RS means adjustments. And Oakland is what we're using for kind of our urban systems. So that's a 32% cost adder. And San Jose is what we're using for suburban, which is pretty conservative. You can see it's just barely below the urban. And that's a 30% cost adder. And, you know, recognizing that some areas, like when you get out to the coast, can be significantly more expensive, of course. So you're going to notice that we're using a term of construction multiplier or engineering multiplier throughout the white paper and this presentation. And a construction or engineering multiplier is just a factor that's used to estimate additional costs. So we may have the cost of a treatment unit, but that's not your only cost. You have to do construction. You might have electrical upgrades. You're going to have engineering designs and permitting that is associated with that. So when you're doing high-level cost estimation, what you use is this construction multiplier or engineering multiplier. So for a simpler project, the multiplier can be as low as 0.25. And for treatment projects, we're over 3 for some of them that we'll be going over. So how those construction multipliers are used is pretty simple. So it's the cost of infrastructure times the construction cost multiplier, and that gives us an estimated installed capital cost. So you'll see that Craig's presenting the installed capital cost in many of his slides. And this is how we arrived at that installed capital cost estimate. So next we're going to go into the physical consolidation piece. And this, as I mentioned earlier, is when two systems are physically joined by a pipeline, and generally the larger system provides water that meets drinking water standards to the smaller system. There are other kinds of consolidation that we discuss in the white paper, which are more managerial consolidations where they're not physically connected. But if they're physically connecting, this is what we're calling it. And this can, you know, kind of have a range also where it can be they're physically joined, but the smaller system still retains its own identity as a system, and they're just purchasing water, or it can actually be physically consolidated and absorbed and become just part of the bigger system. So there's kind of still a range there. So just for the physical cost estimate, we're using a $155 per linear foot estimate. And then some of these systems will still need to install a service line, like for domestic wells. Those folks don't actually have a service line currently going out to the road, so that needs to be installed. A lot of systems charge connection fees, and this really varies across the state. There's a huge amount of variation. This number is actually pulled from the 2018 electronic annual report that was submitted to the Division of Drinking Water. So we just looked at the bigger systems and the average of the connection fees they're charging. We excluded 0 to 500 range because that's pretty low. And we weren't sure if people might actually be reporting something that's more like a reconnection fee. So anyway, this is the number we're at, but there is a huge range. You know, some can go up to $30,000 as reported in the electronic annual report. So this is another area that could definitely use some refinement in the future. We have this legal and administrative cost for system acquisition, and then we have a 20% contingency. And as I mentioned earlier, we will be applying estimates for the other needed infrastructure, such as tanks or backup wells, gen sets, that kind of thing. So new wells are something that we're definitely considering. So there are a lot of systems that only have one well right now, or their one well is incredibly old. So we need replacement wells, and we also need additional wells in some of these small systems. So that's what we're kind of budgeting in this section. So for well drilling, we got this information from QK Incorporated, which is a Central Valley engineering firm. And we got kind of these quotes for 3 different depths, but the one we're going to be using for the cost estimation will be this 1,000 foot depth. And then the other piece we need to consider is the estimated production. So that makes a difference in the cost estimate. And we're actually going to be getting quotes from them for a few more production ranges, just to make sure we actually kind of can go up to the higher flows on this rated flow. But how we'll be costing it out as far as production goes is based on max day demand. We want to make sure that whatever well is installed can meet a maximum day demand for the system so that it's an adequate backup well. There also, could be SCADA costs associated and electrical upgrades. Generally, these sites have nothing on them. And we assume that we would be buying land potentially for this, so that all of the add-ons need to be accounted for here. So it definitely adds up. It's about $1.6 million without the construction multiplier for a new well at this point for the assumption. The application of new well costs to human right water systems and at-risk systems, we're going to be applying this not on a per system basis, but on an overall basis, assuming that 48% of the systems need a second well just because they only have one. 46% need a replacement well due to well age. And we're also assuming here that a new well does not necessarily mean you don't need treatment anymore. That could be the case. If you get lucky and drill a good well, that's wonderful. But in some cases, you drill a new well and then you actually still need treatment. So we're assuming that you'll still need treatment. We're assuming the new wells will be 1,000 feet deep for costing purposes, and land purchase will need to be at a cost of $150,000 for each well. And then all of these will be getting kind of that regional cost adjustment as well. So now I'm going to actually hand the talking part over to Craig, but I'm going to keep advancing the slides. So if you hear him prompt me, that's what's happening there. And then I'll take it back after the end of the treatment section. So Craig?
Yeah, go ahead.
And as that's happening, I'm hearing someone clearing their throat. I'm going to mute all, and then Craig, unmute you, okay?
Sure. All right, hopefully we're live again here. So with respect to the treatment costs and such, really the first step in all of this is getting a sense of, well, and I'll kind of segue that before and say that most of the systems on the human right to water list are groundwater systems. So we do focus on wells and groundwater treatment quite a bit here. And I'll kind of defer to that. But the first step really for any real treatment system is just getting a sense of how big it is. And we did this really looking on the available data and modifying the approach that was put forth in the trichloropropane initial statement of reasons, where you make this adjustment of 150 gallons per person per day. We do have population data. We just don't necessarily have well size data available. And then just kind of exercise that through a peaking factor to get to max day demand with a 1.5 there. And basically, we took the approach that, yes, that can get you to an estimate of max day demand, but most groundwater wells can't, and frankly, in a lot of cases, shouldn't be exercised all 24 hours a day. So we kind of constrain that down to 16 hours to get a number, and that basically bumps up the calculated max day demand that was used in the initial statement of reasons by 33%. I will say here that treatment systems, especially the groundwater systems, many of these utilities on the list don't have storage, which means that these systems have to meet max day demand at an instantaneous basis. So you'll see that as we go through the treatment costs as far as the capital side goes, because that's how big the system really needs to be. The flip side is all the operational costs lean on that acronym you see there, the ADD, the average day demand. So I'll kind of just give you a sense of what we've done there. Tara, you can click to the next one here. If we take the human right to water list, these are the primary contaminants you'll see. Arsenic, trichloropropane is newly regulated, so there's a lot of systems who haven't even had the chance to address that yet. Nitrate is just always out there, mostly because it's really difficult to manage. And then you see some others, uranium, fluoride, and there's a handful of others that we'll give a sense to. But after we sort of get the size of the system, the next piece is, well, what the heck do you do? And this is really taking the best available technologies listed for each of these approaches, the best available treatment technology, and really filtering down. So for arsenic, it's actually, there's a lot of options out there. But by and large, unless there's something else in the water, you end up with either coagulation filtration, or for smaller systems, you tend to see an absorption-based approach. Those are simpler to run, but often bear heavier operational costs because of the nature of that. TCP, trichloropropane, is pretty straight ahead with just granular activated carbon. Nitrate, especially on intermittent use wells of smaller size, ion exchange is really the de facto treatment approach. Again, with uranium, and then fluoride, there's a handful of fluoride violations out there, and that really defers to activated alumina. So that just gives you a sense of the technologies there are. Beyond this list, I think we have a slide that shows it, but several more contaminants out there where we've taken different approaches, but really focused on the ones here as they do account for probably 80+% of the violations on the human right to water list. So on the next slide, this goes back to the engineering multiplier. So, we've got the size of the system. Now we know what that treatment approach is, and we can get to those capital costs pretty easily. And then just synthesizing those numbers with these engineering or construction multipliers, sort of tuned to the approach based on the complexity. So GAC that's granular activated carbon, and it tends to be a pretty straightforward treatment approach with pressure vessels, and really just monitoring. There's not much, moving parts to that treatment approach. And then some of the others, we kind of adopted higher values because of the complexity of what it may take there. So on the next slide, that just kind of gets from our capital equipment to the installed cost. Another huge chunk of this is operator time. This really becomes disproportionate with small systems, as the level of care for any given treatment system is, I don't want to say fully independent, but kind of separated from the size of that system. But the cost is the same. So for smaller systems, You look at these annual costs here, 20-something thousand dollars a year. If you put that over a rate base of 100 people, it's a big hit to this. So what we did was just aggregated some costs. You can see the link below where we got those, and then really apply those costs. The T1, T2, those are the certification levels that you need. The higher the level, the more complex the system is. And then went through and just, based on our understanding of these treatment approaches, assigned basically a percent of an operator, how much time we think they would need. If you look at 25%, that's 10 hours a week to be out there nurturing these systems, and then the resulting costs. So for each treatment approach, there is a designated operation cost, and this is where that number came from querying the publicly available data and then proportioning that level of operator care based on the treatment approach. So on the next slide here, this is, again, reiterating just those most common contaminants and the treatment approach. And this just gives you a sense of what it means and how we develop this cost model. So on the next slide, we look at the installed capital costs. So the purple dots there, that's the purple dots are nitrate treatment. The circles that are the highest level there, the greens is arsenic coagulation filtration. You see it shifted out there because that tends to be more suited for larger systems. And then the red and blue triangle kind of overlap. Those are really just lead lag pressure vessels, either for arsenic adsorption in this case, or GAC treatment for TCP. So what you see really, a lot of the times these will be expressed as a curve, like we show for the arsenic coagulation filtration. But because of the availability of equipment, for instance, like the GAC treatment approach, they come in pre-engineered paired vessels that typically go from 6 feet diameter to 8 feet diameter to 10 feet diameter. So rather than a curve here, you kind of see this binning of costs based on what's readily available for treatment equipment, because a certain piece of equipment can treat a range of costs. So that's how we've showed it here. It differs a little bit with the arsenic approach because you can put that equipment out a lot of different ways. We can share those details, but probably beyond what we have to here. But it just gives you a sense of the function of treatment flow rate, that first piece we calculated out, what the corresponding installed capital costs are. So the next slide then just gives a sense of the operational costs. And again, we've built these sort of models for not just these treatment approaches, but several others. And you see here, I'll just focus on the purple again, the nitrate cost. This is really normalizing consumables. So in this, depending on what it is, consumables, disposables, and residuals management here. So pretty much everything less electrical and the human element of operations, and then the analytical costs, just normalizing production costs based on those chemical approaches. And you just see, again, nitrate is really, that curve is really steep. It's difficult to manage. It's expensive to manage. And then the other treatment approaches, depending on what they are, become more or less burdensome depending on, just how efficient those treatment processes are. I think one more slide, maybe. Yes, this is just the menu of other things we've looked at. You've got fluoride managed with activated alumina. Iron and manganese show up quite a bit. Radium, perchlorate uranium, and then gross alpha. There was also a handful of surface water related violations that we've looked into and developed costs for, either replacement treatment plants in some cases, packaged treatment plants, or sort of process management specifically for disinfection byproduct occurrences on the list. So that just shows, kind of just captures some of the other spaces we have cost developed. And I think that may get us through the treatment piece. If not, I'll be surprised on what's the next slide.
Craig, have we lost you? Tara, you should be unmuted.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to discuss the last two items that we're presenting today, which is point of use, point of entry, and other infrastructure needs costs. So some of you may remember the point of use and point of entry costs were actually presented last time, but we've made a few updates based on better information that we have now. So I'm going to go over that. And then the other infrastructure needs costs, last time we presented, it was just sort of a, hey, we'll be presenting these in the future, but we don't have them yet. And now we have them. So that's what we're going to cover. So point of use and point of entry are really only considered for small systems. They're only allowed for systems with 200 connections or less, but realistically, you know, they may not be actually able to be used in systems of that size. You really need very high compliance numbers in order for this to be considered a real solution. So, you know, realistically, it might really be less than that, but we'll calculate out the costs. It is an option that's considered for domestic wells, and our assumptions are that point of entry granular activated carbon will be used for 1,2,3-trichloropropane and other contaminants that have exposure routes other than ingestion, meaning like you don't want to inhale that stuff when you're taking a shower. So that's why we want to treat your whole house. Point of entry means it's outside your house. You're treating all the water going into the home. Point of use would be something more like a sink type application. So that we're assuming that would be reverse osmosis treatment type, and that would be for inorganic contaminants such as nitrate and arsenic. And just as a note, nitrate over 25 milligrams per liter as N is not considered to be effectively treated with point of use RO. So we would consider it not applicable. Once we get into those really high concentrations, there are no currently NSF approved units that can do that. There are some in other countries, but they aren't currently NSF approved here. So this could be an area where things change in the future, but at this time, we can't assume that that methodology would be effective. The point of use would be effective for very high nitrate concentrations. And so these capital costs you did see before, but the new additions really here are around admin and project management and outreach costs. So it takes a lot of time and effort to reach out to individual customers in the system, inform them about this option, work with them on, you know, getting the units purchased and installed in their home. And so these costs have really been updated based on people that have actually done these types of projects down in the Central Valley. And another thing that I would like you to note is that for domestic wells and state small water systems, we don't always have great analytical data. And in the case of domestic wells, we generally have no data. In the case of state smalls, it can be very limited data. And so we actually need some actual numbers to work with here. Do they have a real problem? We're going to be modeling their water quality, but we don't know what their real water quality is. So you would want an initial round of sampling for sure. So for those systems, we're assuming $500 for initial sampling, just so you understand all the problems they have or potentially don't have. So this first part is for the capital cost per connection for point of entry GAC. And you know, not all of this might strictly speaking be capital, but we included the admin and project management and outreach costs because these are really our initial costs. They're associated with the first time you install the unit. So that's why they're lumped with the capital cost per connection. And the second half at the table is the capital cost per connection for point of use reverse osmosis treatment. And so you can see it actually adds up. So in many cases, you know, the smaller systems, this may be a cost-effective solution, but actually once you get to some of the larger systems, it actually, you know, closer to the 200 connections, it actually gets pretty expensive, and centralized treatment starts to make, or local at the wellhead treatment starts to make a lot more sense. So we'll get into that more in future presentations when we go over results, but it is an interesting part of the analysis. So annual operations and maintenance costs, you know, these units have pre-filters that need to be changed. They have replacement of the media and or membranes that needs to happen. There's an operator that needs to go out there and collect samples a couple times a year and do those change outs. There's reporting associated with these units as well. So there's this ongoing cost per connection, which is quite expensive, especially in the case of point of entry GAC. So you can see how the costs can add up for a larger number of connections. Okay, so the last piece I'm going to talk about is the other infrastructure needs. And these would be layered over any of those other solutions for the systems in aggregate, not specific systems, since we don't know what each individual system might need. So these costs that I'll be going over are things like pipelines, pipeline replacement, tanks, booster pumps, well pumps, electrical, and we'll be using a construction multiplier, which is still under development, that will be applied to those as well. And then we have meters and backflow prevention. And for meters and backflow prevention, really, we're not assuming necessarily that the grant money would cover every single meter and every single backflow assembly. But for residential units and schools, that's where we would see this as applicable. Backflow prevention assemblies for businesses may more appropriately be paid for by the business rather than by grant funding. So pipelines, we have costs for multiple sizes here, 4-inch through 12-inch. For the physical consolidation, you might have noticed we had assumed a 12-inch pipeline so that we could meet fire flow. But for something more like, domestic lines and replacement of mains in a small system, something more like a 4-inch line would probably be appropriate. So these are the assumptions that you can see down here. This actually, if you're like in a city and you have to, have a lot of traffic control and things like this, these costs would be very low, right? So this would be more like in a rural area without a lot of those types of constraints. It can get, up to $300 a linear foot, more like in a city if you have a lot of traffic control and repavement to worry about. So the next thing is tanks. A lot of these systems are very, very small. So we wanted to have the low end or the smaller end of tanks available as well. And we want to make sure that we're able to meet a max day demand out of storage. And we found that a lot of these systems, when we looked at the Kern County human right to water systems, they didn't have any storage at all. And then another big percentage of them had some storage, but not enough to meet max day. So we'd really like to, have this as a line item so that we can evaluate how much it would cost to properly install these tanks and be able to provide max day demand for these small systems. So hydropneumatic tanks will be assumed for smaller systems, and then we get into the ground level storage tanks for larger systems that have a bigger max day demand. And additionally, the costs here would also include the land, electrical upgrades, and boosters. This is just for the tank itself. So a lot of these are kind of additive costs. These are the booster pumps that would go with those tanks as well. And this does assume one in operation and one in standby. And it's a VFD package system with controls. Then the electrical costs would also have to get added on here. So you see how these projects can add up to be quite expensive, even for a small tank. So other infrastructure needs, a lot of these systems have very old well pumps and may need replacement, or in the case of new wells, they'll need a well pump in there for the first time. So these are just different flow ratings down here in the middle row, and we will be getting costs for higher flow rates as well, so that we can kind of more completely model this system. But you can see how low we're going down to 85 gallons a minute, which actually in some cases is, quite a lot of flow for some of these systems. But we have to have kind of a lower end to work with. So the other infrastructure needs that I mentioned, a lot of these sites will need electrical work. So, assuming that you're starting with bare land, that's a lot of funds are required really to get the electrical upgrades. And that's also quite a slow step in the construction process. And we also want to be able to look at gensets, generators, so that a system could actually produce water in the case of a power outage or other emergency. We've had a lot of those in California with the planned power outages, and a lot of systems were inadequately prepared for those planned power outages. So that's an area of concern. So adding a generator onto a well and or a tank site can really help improve reliability during those situations. This is the cost for meters. We'll probably be looking at getting some costs for some more simple type meters rather than just the drive-by. But for now, this is what we have costs for. And we're putting the 1-inch here because that's what we're assuming for residential meters. And this is just for backflow prevention assemblies. You can see it gets quite expensive the higher size we get. I do actually have also bigger units that aren't included on here. This is more applicable to residential units, but we have larger sizes as well that can be applied to schools. So this is our assumption for the other infrastructure needs cost applications, which, as I mentioned, will not be applied on a system specific basis. Rather, it will be applied as an overlay to the solutions that are modeled. and will just be applied in more general terms to human right to water systems and then to the at-risk system, so we can understand the potential for other infrastructure that might need to be replaced. And some more specifics, I already covered the well replacement or second well assumptions. So we do think that about 29% of systems will need a new pump and motor due to age. About another 29 will need electrical upgrades due to age. And then 56% of systems will need additional storage, 58% need backup power. And a lot, about 66% will need distribution system replacement due to main age. And about 82% need meters. And the place we got these assumptions from is really the Kern County deep dive we did into the human right to water reports that we got from the Division of Drinking Water from inspections and sanitary surveys. And these definitely could be refined moving forward as more system specific information is gathered. But as a starting point, this is what we're using for now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the at-risk water systems. The lists of those systems are still being developed, but simultaneously to that, we need to actually come up with solutions for those systems and a methodology for the costs, so that when we have the list of systems in our hands, we're able to do the math and come up with the costs. So they will be evaluated for physical consolidation. We've actually already run the numbers for all of the smaller systems in the state of California. So we just need to pair them with that at-risk or not at-risk designation. And where physical consolidation is cost effective, and if it's part of a regional project especially, then that cost would be used for the model. And then we will be using those other infrastructure needs assumptions that I just covered. Another piece could be a system administrator at a cost of $12,000 a year for 5 years. And that's really important because a lot of these systems, they don't really currently have the financial managerial capacity to solve their problems and go get grant funding. So it's really important to have somebody that can kind of guide them to a more sustainable position so that they kind of get asset management plans in place, water rate studies so that customers are actually paying for the water appropriately and that financially they're stable moving forward. In many cases, they're missing kind of fiscal policies and controls, drought plans, all of the kind of the stuff that's normal in a bigger system, but lacking sometimes in a smaller system. In many cases, they'll need updated rate structures and fiscal policies to make sure that infrastructure is actually getting repaired and upgraded. And so this is kind of an interesting piece that we'll want to make sure that those systems are ready to move into the future and that their rates can support anything that they need in the future. So in this case, we are not going to assume long-term O&M for these particular systems. And this is still, I'd say a little bit, this whole piece is still under discussion and probably in the future, there will be adaptations in this particular area. But for the moment, this is what we're moving forward with. So that takes us to audience poll question number 5. So what interim operations and maintenance supports should be considered for human right to water systems as part of the long-term cost model? And you can mark as many as applicable.
And again, our human right to water systems are those that are failing. They have a primary or secondary MCL violation.
All right, and the results are back. So the top vote getter here was the parts replacement and or maintenance at 97% of the votes. And remember, people could vote for more than one, so this adds up to more than 100%. Treatment and media replacement was 81% of people. Operator salary and benefits, 69% of folks. General manager salary and benefits, 53%. Lab testing and sampling, 78%. Electricity costs, 69%. And other, so hopefully we'll get some emails back on that. I think we got a couple follow-up emails last time. So I will move on here to audience poll question number 6. So what interim operations and maintenance costs should be considered for at-risk systems as part of the long-term cost model? You can mark as many as applicable. All right, so again, we have the top answer as parts replacement and or maintenance at 96%, treatment and media replacement at 92%. And then we have lab testing and sampling at 79%, cover electricity costs 71%, general manager salary and benefits 46%, operator salary and benefits 63%. And again, we had some other, which was 8% this time. And I will move on to the next piece. Okay, so this one's more of an opinion poll, especially. So the question is, how do you feel about the level of technical detail in this report in the corresponding white paper in the presentation? Do you feel that more technical detail is needed, the level of detail is good, or the material is too technical? And also other, if you want to give us a longer form answer. Unfortunately, the Zoom platform is not great for longer form answers, so that's why it has to be done by email. Oh, good. Well, I'm really relieved to hear that. The level of detail is good, had 89%. More technical detail is needed, 2 votes at 7%. Material is too technical, 0%. Wow. Well, you didn't look at the appendix yet. No, just kidding. Okay, great. Thank you. I'll move on to the next discussion topic about the cost assessment. So the questions are, does this process capture all of the necessary steps required for conducting a statewide cost assessment providing solutions to the human right to water systems and at-risk systems? And the follow-on question is, what, if any, additional analysis or consideration should be made when conducting this cost assessment? And I guess I'll add on to that, if additional information is required, we'd love to hear your opinion on how that information could be gathered, because I'd say that's one of the limitations we've faced, is there's a lot of data we would love to have that just isn't available at the moment. So I'll let Kristen handle the moderation on it, on this one.
We'll give folks a moment to use the chat box if they want to submit a question, or they can raise their hand. If you're participating via Zoom, if you're participating via the webcast, please feel free to email us at our safer@waterboards.ca.gov email address. We do have staff monitoring that inbox and are happy to share your question on your behalf or comment. Give folks another minute or so. looks like we have a question that's come in. Does the cost assessment complete cost savings from physical consolidations due to the elimination of some of the existing overheads? Tara? Tara, you may be muted.
Thank you. Yes, I muted myself and I still don't have the power to unmute, unfortunately. So thank you for the question. That's a really valid point. And at this point, we have not been able to incorporate cost savings from physical consolidation due to the elimination of overhead. It's a very site-specific question because in some cases, you know, it's complicated because of the different rate structure in different systems. So customers could potentially, in some cases, end up paying more money or less money because of the rates in the joining system and how rates are applied to them. So I would say that's a really interesting point to consider in the future. But at this point, I don't think we have enough information to complete that piece. Kristen, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it's a good idea and something that we should definitely be thinking about. But yeah, Char, we haven't quite addressed that yet. I'm going to move over to, it looks like Horacio, you have a question now. I'm going to unmute you. And you should be able to, there we go. You can ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I have a question. What happens when you have a water system that every year is getting polluted by nitrates and also the arsenic? They're going up because there's a lot of overdraft on the basin, and there's a lot of overuse of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. Do you consider the water system to be a risk, or you have to wait until it gets out of compliance?
So when the system becomes out of compliance, so if there's a primary or secondary MCL, then that system would then be on our human right to water list or our failing list until that system comes back into compliance. For our at-risk list, we are currently developing that methodology right now, UCLA, Corona, everyone on the call, and all of our stakeholders. And we do have a number of water quality risk indicators. So if we have a system where water quality trends are at 80% or above the MCL and trending upwards, that would indicate risk. If we see that the percentage of sources are above the MCL or getting close to it, they could be more at risk. So there are a number of indicators that we're looking at as part of our risk assessment that could get that system on our at-risk list, which would then bump them up higher in terms of eligibilities, potentially for technical assistance and funding through the SAFER program. I hope that answers your question. Did that capture it?
And Kristen, this is Greg Gorman. I would just add to Horatio's point, we are looking at the anthropogenic compounds such as nitrate, or you mentioned the fertilizers and things like TCP, with that lens that yes, those are more likely to increase than say arsenic, which tends to be relatively stable in most wells based on the background geology. So we are looking at those compounds with a bit of a different sensitivity, knowing that they are subject to change.
And we also have the data pulled so that we can look at co-contamination. So if nitrate's at 80% of the MCL, we'd be much more concerned about proposing trichloropropane treatment with granular activated carbon because of the need for future treatment and also nitrate sloughing. So we'll be looking at some of those co-contamination issues once another compound has reached 80% of the MCL. We've pulled the data that way so we can look at it kind of a little more on a system-specific basis.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for your question. We have another question in the chat box, which I'll read out loud. Are you factoring in the massive loss of income that is affecting these cities, which are preventing them to go forward with needed improvements? And I know that Michelle Frederick, our section chief for the SAFER program, is on and would like to address this question. And she has a slide, which I will share on her behalf. Go ahead, Michelle. I can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, thank you for this question. We put you sort of down further so that I would have a chance to quickly make a slide for this. Because I think what the question is very important. I know there have been a lot of COVID impacts to water systems. And so I wanted to first thank you for the question, and then also point out that we are doing a COVID-19 financial impact survey to try and better inform ourselves on systems that may be struggling, and then sort of take that information and feed it to legislatures and people that can then go forward and try and make changes and support our water system. So I just wanted to really highlight that, because we haven't had very good response on that survey historically, and we now have staff reaching out around this, but just, that is one way to let us know the financial impacts that your city may be dealing with. And I believe Aqua is doing some outreach, and so others are as well. And then sort of in terms of addressing, needed improvements, we are, at least for the systems that we're looking at, the human right to water systems, the at-risk systems, we are trying to incorporate the O&M piece in this, because we do recognize that, you don't just put in capital infrastructure and walk away. There are needed, ongoing repair and replacement. And so, that is something that we're trying to capture through that. And then if you have additional thoughts of things that you don't think we are considering, please do it. Go ahead and send us an email and we will follow up with that. So, and Kristen, I just wanted to do, while I have the floor here, a little bit of a clarification too on the secondary standards on the human right to water systems. That is, those are there when we have enforcement actions we've taken. There are waivers on secondary secondary standards for smaller or for lower levels that a community can request. And so we're really looking at where there are enforcement actions. So thank you.
That's right. Thanks for the clarification, Michelle. We do have another question that's come in that says, I did not see a factor to account for the cost of applying for a grant. Thank you, Stan, for your question. Tara, did you want to discuss that?
Yes.
Costs around applying for funding and financing?
Yes, that is a huge issue. And we're actually working with Sac State. Sac State's developing those technical assistance costs for us. So it's not in this version of the paper, but we have a placeholder for it in our model. So it will be included when they're able to provide those costs. They've been working to gather them since they do a lot of technical assistance work. I don't know if you want to add anything, Kristen.
Thanks. Well, I'll turn it over to Sac State. Khalil or Maureen, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. Let's see. I did not see another comment. I did not see a factor for the price of the increase caused by the time span between application and project completion.
Yeah, so this is actually something we've definitely been discussing with the SAFER group and Division of Financial Assistance. It's a little challenging in a way because we don't really know how the funds will be spent, on which projects they will be spent. So at this point, we haven't been able to include that as a factor, but I think as plans become a little more solidified about how spending will proceed, that's something that should be accounted for in the future. We've definitely discussed that. Kristen, do you want to add anything else?
Nope, I think that was great. Thank you, Tara.
Tara and Kristen, this is Maureen from OWP at Sac State, and I'll just weigh in on the last question. I was muted before. Yeah, we're currently gathering costs for the technical assistance we do under Prop 1 for helping different systems put applications together for the grant. So we are tallying those, and we'll be getting them over to Corona team for incorporation.
Thank you, Maureen. All right, I don't see any more chats in the chat box, and I don't think anything's come in through the SAFER inbox yet. I do encourage you to chat your question to us, and I'm going to share the presentation again, bring that up. I'm going to go to this one. I got it. Whew. Gone through a lot of slides in a short period of time. Appreciate you staying with us. I know this is pretty technical. All right. So please, if you have questions, put them in the chat box or raise your hand. While you're considering your questions for us, just wanted to highlight the timeline for us moving forward with the cost assessment. And I want to make sure, can you all see my timeline?
Yes, we see it.
Awesome. Okay. So we are nearing the end of our development of the model. Your feedback is critical. We really encourage you to reach out to us if you have ideas on how the model can be improved, if there's cost estimates, numbers that we should be incorporating or considering, any multipliers that we should consider, or you feel like we need to adjust. Again, please feel free to reach out to us with your thoughts and ideas. We are hoping to complete the development of the cost model early next year and present some of the findings and the high-level analysis with the public at that time. But our goal is to make sure that we have our final cost assessment numbers, our estimates of what the demand might be for the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, prepared and ready to go for the next fund expenditure plan. I do want to emphasize too that we will be doing a gap analysis. So we'll figure out what the demand might look like using our cost model, and then look at what funding sources are available to support the SAFER program so that we could determine how large that gap might be, supply and demand. For immediate next steps, again, please take a look at our white paper. The PowerPoint presentation slides will be posted online, and the recording from this webinar will also be posted on our website. If you have any thoughts or ideas, please try to submit those to us at our safer@waterboards.ca.gov email address by December 20th. We, again, are trying to determine our final cost methodology by the end of the year. You know, we love our poll questions here for the SAFER program. One last one, and let me see if I can launch it real fast. This question is asking, which of the following should be included in the budget for a small at-risk system? You can mark as many as is applicable. We are trying to incorporate our at-risk systems into the cost methodology. You may have some systems that are at risk because of water quality issues, accessibility issues, TMF capacity issues, or affordability issues. And your thoughts here are important to us. Give you a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and launch it, share results. All right, it looks like 96% of you think that technical assistance or administrative oversight assistance is really important for our at-risk systems. 82% believe storage tanks are probably necessary, 71% see meters, 68% for main replacement, 61% for generator set, 79% for interim O&M support, and then a few of you have some additional ideas. I again encourage you to email us, safer@waterboards.ca.gov. And we're going to be opening things up for Q&A. And I do want to put a plug in real quick. You've heard us talk a lot about our human right to water or failing systems and our at-risk systems. Those are the two buckets of systems that we're going to be estimating long-term solution costs for the SAFER program. If you had tuned in on our last webinar for our risk assessment methodology development, you may have heard us mention that we are potentially looking at expanding the criteria for our human right to water list. So our criteria for how we define a failing water system. We may be looking at additional violations in addition to our primary and secondary MCL violations. And this expanded criteria will change the set of systems that are on our current human right to water list and our at-risk list. So stay tuned. We'll be digging into that a little bit more on our December 14th webinar on our risk assessment. And I want to encourage you all to please submit any questions or comments you have. This is the very end of our presentation today, and we still have ample time for Q&A. I'm going to bring up the chat box. We had someone call us out on the typo for our timeline. I appreciate that. It should be spring 2021 for the fund expenditure plan. Thank you for that. Yes, we're not moving back in time.
I did fix it on one version of the presentation, evidently not the one that counted though.
Too many versions going back and forth. All right, let's see. Do we have anyone with their hands raised? Nope, and I don't see an email from anyone to our SAFER inbox yet. Give folks a little bit more time. Okay. Well, us working on this project, the folks here at the Water Board and Corona and Saxgate, we will all stay on for a few more minutes if a question or a comment or an idea comes to you. But again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today on this Friday and for your continued participation in the development of our cost assessment methodology. And if you've been participating in our other webinars, our risk assessment methodology as well, we really value your input, your ideas. It's been really helpful in helping us make sure that the models and the methodologies we're developing are as good as they can be for our first round. So again, thank you. All right. I still don't see any questions. I think we'll wrap up pretty soon. Again, thank you. Please tune in December 14th for our risk assessment methodology webinar, where we'll be discussing thresholds and weighting and scoring approaches for that assessment. We appreciate your participation there. Again, please don't hesitate to email us if you have any questions, concerns, ideas, extra data points that we should be utilizing. All right, Haiti, would you like to shut it down?
Thanks, Kristen. Oh, it looks like we have someone thanking us for the webinar, so you're welcome, and thank you for joining us today. And I think that we haven't received any more emails in our inbox, and you've gone through the chat box. And the next slide. Great, thank you. Our next discussion topic is on public engagement. How can we improve public engagement on the development of cost model? Feel free to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question or comment. And if you're calling in by phone, press *9. So I'm looking at the attendees list and don't see any hands up at the moment. But if you're thinking about this question, go ahead and do so and raise your hand when you're ready. You can also email us at safer@waterboards.ca.gov if you would like to comment or ask us a question based on the public engagement discussion topic. Oh, I see a hand raised. Hasna Khan, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Hasna. I think this is one of the most important parts of improving the assessment process is how you get the public engaged in a conversation or dialogue. Would it be possible to have an open within your website a spot where public can come in and engage in a dialogue on a continuous basis, which would be taken care of at least as comments from the board, water boards?
Thank you for your question. That's a great question. Kristen, would you like to respond?
No, our safer email address is designed for that purpose. The public, anyone can participate in the development of our methodologies and continuously engage with us. I encourage you to use our safer@waterboards.ca.gov email address to reach out to us. If you have questions, comments, concerns, you want to schedule a call to dig in deeper or to discuss at a high level what we're doing, that is the primary vehicle we are using to stay in touch with folks. We also have an email listserv, our Safer Lyris list, which you can sign up for on the Safer website, which means that you will receive email notifications when we're going to be hosting public workshops and events to continuously engage on our development of our needs assessment methodologies and other activities that the Safer program is working on. So we definitely want to stay engaged with the public on this effort. So please email us if you'd like to get more involved. Great question. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. If I may just add one line to that, I'm into it. I'm familiar and I know how to go around to collect information. But I was thinking in terms of the public, which is more of a public, in other words, the small systems. In the recent times, communicating with the small systems, and they do not actually get into these kinds of provisions that you have. So there's no way for them to get a good feedback on what's going on, how to make it better, and all the topics that we discuss. I'm looking to the PSPS, impact of PSPS and the water systems, and the cost is a major factor for which I'm concerned that how can we assist them? And they don't know where to even go for seeking for funds or help or assistance, whichever. So I was just thinking if I could at least guide them towards a direction that is where the language is their language, a question they can bring up. That was my point.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate that. And we are doing our best to reach out to those small systems to get them engaged in this effort, but also to encourage them to reach out to our engagement units our Division of Financial Assistance
Mhm.
if they are looking to get help or get more involved in the SAFER program. But we are always open to additional ideas on how to connect with our smaller systems. So I appreciate that feedback.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. Let me see if there are any other raised hands. So again, if you would like to comment on how we can improve public engagement on the development of cost model, please raise your hand. Or if you're calling in by phone, press *9. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So thank you everyone for participating. You did have some great questions, and I'm glad we had the space to answer your questions and have the opportunity for you to also comment. And with that, I will turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you. I'm going to shut the webinar down. We appreciate, again, you sticking with us till the very end. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a good Friday. Bye.
Yay.